Right, work is finished. A few days hiatus. We're now moving from the colours that I feel like I have a reasonable level of experience in, that I can give some sort of opinion and it should have some weight to it, to the colours that I've probably splashed in various versions. Um, I've got experience of all the colours, of course, in various decks, but not to the level of 150 hours, 200 hours of yellow green. I've played min maxes, I've played Aerobears, red aggro deck lately. I'm going to start from blue, and I suppose we should just get started, really. So, Carnhenge in enchantment decks, super easy to burn, but you don't feel bad about placing it on the field either. I think this is pretty true just in general. For 1 mana, you get a +1/+1, which is going to hang around on the field. And the sorts of things that remove enchantments, you don't tend to find at 1 mana. So this isn't going anywhere for a long time. You're going to get your value out of this. You're going to get your money's worth. Also a key card in Valkyrie decks specifically. Of course, most enchantment decks want to run this. There are only a finite number of enchantments in the game right now. And this is probably one of the best ones because it's easy to use, but also, of course, it's also easy to use to replace. I suppose I should talk about the power as well. On Reddit, Bad was just talking about how he got to champion, and he was using a Valkyrie deck. And he actually likes keeping Carnhenge in hand. He insists it's not so bad. Because the Rainbow's End path gives you the ability to replace enchantments with other enchantments, what he quite likes to do is he might keep Carnhenge in hand, and then when other more expensive enchantments such as Speedway are down, on turn 5, normally it takes you to turn 6 to Horn, but on turn 5 he can put down the Carnhenge on top of the Speedway, get the 2 mana refund, so he's then got the 6 mana, and then he can Horn a turn earlier. And I imagine that can get even more ridiculous, where you can do that to Horn a turn earlier, but you can also use your Leprechaun's Coin if you're on Pursuit, and end up getting some sort of crazy Horn on turn 4. I'm not sure if you'd have developed the board quite to the degree that you would need to do that. Long story short though, this card is very useful, very versatile, very easy to use, and you're really likely to get your value out of it. Plagiarist, right now this stat line is just so frustrating. If you're winning with Fey Plagiarist, you could probably be winning with an awful lot of cards, and the breach ability is amazing, but the fact that you would have to put in genuine work, or your opponent would have to either have a very bad deck or just be drawing very badly to be incapable of dealing with this. It doesn't have Agile or Lurker, and laughably, of course, because I mean, why would it? But if it had Overrun even, it has no way of actually getting to your opponent, if you know what I mean. So the breach effect is awesome, but you would need to invest seriously in being able to enable it in the first place to reach your opponent. Also, copy one of your opponent's artifacts or enchantments is also more late game perhaps than you'd really like out of a 1-drop. If this was a 1-drop, you'd be looking for other 1-drops, basically. Field of Poppies. The community seems a bit divided on this card. A lot of people think it's pretty rubbish. I don't think anyone thinks it's amazing and it's this super awesome 10 out of 10 card. But I think a lot of people also have been pleasantly surprised by how useful it is. And I'm not quite sure why. Maybe because I play so much Turn of Seasons. But Winter really causes you to appreciate how annoying Fragile 1 can be and how it can dictate what you can or can't do. Especially, of course, regarding Meso Libres, which I talked about in yellow. Fragile is actually extremely significant. Alright, Frecky 1. So, Valkyrie, we're getting into the first Valkyrie. Of course, the 1-drop for mono blue decks often. Valkyries pretty much always. 1-drop, 2/1, stats the right way around. It gets swift as well. Super easy to use. Also dies kind of easily. which isn't so terrible for Valkyries a lot of the time. Because of the Swift, they often get to choose when it dies, which means, you know, things like Storm Dotter's Chosen can get ramped up if they want it to ramp up. If you Horn, you almost always kill your scouts first, so that the Storm Dotter is then even stronger for its 2 attacks. Grease Monkey, I had all 4 copies. I sold blue. I sold quite a lot of blue to enable me to fill out my yellow and green. So I haven't really seen it working, and I'm not quite sure what could be in the patch that's coming or in the expansion that's coming that would make this card like super good. 1, 2, I've mentioned it so many times at this point going through these videos, but it's just 1, 2 is not a good stat line right now. It's a really bad stat line. Lurker restore 3 health to a minion, so you've seen a situation where you've got a big beefy minion or something really dangerous, and because it's got Lurker, it sits in the corner, big beefy minion protects it, and your opponent just can't take it down. I mean, Short Stag only takes 3 damage a turn. I mean, not 3 damage a turn, it takes 3 damage per combat. So you could sort of see a situation perhaps where... But that is so much work for very little payoff. Short Stag doesn't really need any help. The minions that this would help don't need a lot of help, or there are easier ways of giving them help. So Grease Monkey doesn't tend to be in a lot of decks. It's in a few because it's a Valkyrie, because it's a 1-drop. Honed Edge. If you're playing Einherjar, then you might use Honed Edge, because Einherjar on sort of it's okay at 2-3, but its value is exponential when you have it on enchantments. You know, fully heals whenever an enemy minion dies is the sort of thing where you put it on a Carnhenge and it's sort of like, well, how do they get rid of a 3-4? In the early game, putting down Carnhenge and Einherjar Thane is strong. That's really difficult to get rid of. Your opponent basically has to stay away from that side of the board for a good 2 or 3 turns because they can't do anything about it. That's just too big, that's too beefy. So in respect to that sort of deck, Honed Edge is good. In respect to decks in general, how good is this card just in a void, sort of like on paper without considering practicalities? It's okay, but you know, these sorts of cards, you need a minion and you need a trade where Honed Edge is going to be favourable, and even then you're trading this card plus the minion into the other card. Presumably you kill the minion, but your minion stays alive, ideally. But the minion is still likely to eventually die to the another minion, which would make it a 2 for 2. In an ideal situation, you get a 3 for 2, of course. But you know, unless you've got ways of healing the minion and it's a big beefy minion, this doesn't do an amazing amount. +1 health, things can, things are still going down. The +2 attack, I haven't found it to be that useful all of the as much of the time as I would like it to be. Like if you're racing, this card isn't really making that much difference a lot of the time, considering that it takes up a card slot. That's specific to a card slot. It has value, but as one of your 40 cards, the fact this could just be a good card turns me off a bit, definitely. Jawn, I don't really see too many people using this card. And it's not good. It doesn't really help your win condition all that much. In as much as, if they're trying to, hold down a gigantic beast that you've got, you can jaunt it, move it to the opposite side of the field. This takes up a card slot, and there are more efficient ways further down this list of moving your minions. Jawn is a bit too situational, sort of similar to how I was talking about Honed Edge. These sorts of spells, you need a minion and you need a fantastic situation where Jaunt is actually going to make a significant difference. So you can sort of see, you know, maybe a Hyperborean or a Living Mountain, and then they put something that's got high health, and just, you know, so the overrun isn't really causing that much damage. But the minion they're blocking with isn't really that great either, so you don't really want to destroy it. You know, it's just a chump blocker, but it's a chump blocker with a gigantic backside that could really sort of blunt the edge of your. But already you can see like the situation is already becoming very sort of specific and niche. So not really. Singing Stone. In the decks that buy into it, such as Singing Serpent, this card is of course a must include. It's 10 out of 10. I think even in just enchantment heavy decks, there's value in this card. But a lot of enchantment heavy decks, such as Valkyries, go too fast to have this as the to put this in, because you're really just trying to hit your curve as smoothly as possible. And ideally, the curve, especially with Valkyries, is, you know, can't hand your Frecky Scout going into a 9 Hayar or a Valkyrie Tough, and then you're really hoping for Fosgrim, maybe Frecky Sidecar, I'm not quite so sure. Normally you like to save your Road Queens as well. Storm Dot is chosen, going into Braggy, Bridgeway Troll, maybe Kara. And you really want to just be getting the maximum value. Like you want to hit that curve with your minions as hard as possible. Putting down, you know, some sort of turn 3 Carnhenge, Frecky Scout, Singing Stone, or, you know, a turn 2 Frecky Scout, Singing Stone, Carnhenge. Like, none of those moves sound good. You know, they sound slower than they need to be. It's not what Valkyrie wants to do. But in slower decks, of course, in control decks, of course, I haven't seen too many Fires of Creation decks that use this, but I mean that's not too surprising because you can't sort of really stack enchantments and artifacts all that easily, and either artifacts or enchantments already create quite a heavy demand. Berserker Sickness. It's amazing in decks such as Fang Alpha 9. I haven't seen it too much in Valkyries, but you'd think theoretically it's really good in Valkyries as well, where, you know, you Horn, Road Queen, Berserker Sickness. The sheer amount of damage that can come out, you know, on turn 5, 6 from Valkyries is insane. And the same with Alpha 9, where you put down your Volkov Heavy or your Volkov Veteran has taken some damage and it's now at, you know, 5, 6, 7 attack. And then you Frenzy it, that's 14 just from the Veteran. In other situations, I read this card and my immediate thought was, well, this is perfect. This is sort of, is it called Outcast? I mean, I can't remember all the cards all the time, I suppose. But, you know, considering that I Alcanost, yeah, this. But I was reading this, and I was sort of thinking, you know what, this is such a flexible card. This could be amazing. I was experimenting with blue, yellows, you know, sort of just to see what I could make. And I was thinking, fantastic, well, in a desperate situation, not only is this like a game winner, this is a win condition, getting this on Sapo or the Twins could just create an extra 5, 6, 7, 8 damage almost out of nowhere. But also it's super flexible because if they put down a Sapo or an Ikuturso, something like that, I could Berserker Sickness it and then stun it with Meso Libre. And it even gets around warded because sacrifice isn't a destroy effect. If you sacrifice it, then it doesn't matter if Sapo's warded, it doesn't matter if Celestial Dragon's warded. It's destroyed. So I thought, you know, 2 cards, that was a great combo. Somehow over 40, 50 matches, it has never really panned out. You know, I almost always used the Frenzy on my own minion to finish the game. There are very few situations where my opponent put down a big fatty and I managed to get like this Berserker Sickness, Meso Libre, 1-2 punch going. I mean, it sounds really neat. It sounds like a great way of getting one of your opponent's biggest threats off the board, but it just never quite worked that way. So in some decks, it's absolutely amazing and it's a win condition, but in other decks, it sounds silly to say decks like blue-yellow, because blue-yellow isn't really a tier 1 deck or anything. Or I can't off the top of my head think of a blue-yellow deck that makes me go, oh wow, that's amazing. Apart from things like Singing Serpents, and Berserker Sickness in Singing Serpents isn't really synergistic. So, you know, polarizing. Fantastic in some decks, definitely not. I would heavily consider how much value you're getting out of this card. And take into consideration this is 2 mana you're not spending on anything else. So you need something that is worth Berserker Sickness in the first place, that actually has a genuine way of finishing a game. It's almost like a win con for your win con, where it provides one of your big fatties that's already one of your win cons an easier way of winning. I suppose that makes sense anyway, doesn't it? Breath of Wintertide. I haven't really seen anything. You know, the issue more than anything is it's for a card slot. Very few things need Fragile 3. You know, that's excessive. In order to get maximum value out of this card, what would you even need? Like a Nikku Turso, a Daigachu, and a Sapo all standing right next to each other. And then you could Fragile 3 and it would radically increase the amount of damage you manage to do with the chump blockers that you're trying to get in the way just to take a few of them out. No, you know, if things are going to be clumped together, they very rarely need Fragile 3. As card slots go, this is kind of pointless. A lot of the time you could just destroy the minion. You don't need to give them Fragile 3. So there are it's just too niche. There are so few instances where this would genuinely be useful. It's not a good card. I definitely wouldn't put it in my deck unless there was an incredibly relevant reason. Perhaps some sort of marching orders deck where you could move all of your opponent's cards to one side of the field and then Breath of Wintertide their beefiest cards in some way. Perhaps that would work. I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of value. I don't think it's a good card. Bristling Necklace. Now this is an artifact. I was just saying that artifacts and enchantments don't easily overlap because they're both so demanding and sort of stringent in their own ways. But Bristling Necklace is definitely an artifact which, of course, overlaps with enchantments. Enchantment decks, Rainbow's End decks like to run it. Fires of Creation decks often like to run it as well. It's very rare for a Fires of Creation deck not to have some enchantments. I was playing Rune this morning, and honestly, you know, he was messing around in casuals, but he was playing a Fires of Creation deck, and he, you know, that's all I can say really. The deck itself, when I looked at it afterwards, had 4 or 5 enchantments in it, and Bristling Necklace just allows you to keep rotating, helping you to find what you need. Is more useful in Rainbow's End decks, of course, because the idea a lot of the time with Rainbow's End is you burn your enchantments in the early game, because the card draw around that path is if at the end of your turn the top card of your deck is an enchantment, you draw it. So what you like to in the early game is burn any enchantments in your hand that you can, that are feasible to burn. Because the more enchantments in your deck, the greater the chance that you'll get a draw at the end of your turn, which of course increases your card advantage. The problem is if you burn it and it immediately comes back. Bristling just allows you to constantly put all the burnt enchantments that you don't want right now back into your deck. Any enchantments that you haven't burnt yet, you can just keep cycling through, and it increases your card draw as well. So if you can get the engine going, it's pretty good. Right now it sort of feels like, well, why not? You know, there aren't so many artifacts that you wouldn't want to put this in if you're running 3, 4, 5 enchantments. Demolition Speedway. Oh, the +2 attack is pretty annoying. The combination of +2 attack and overrun is just you know, it says Valkyrie enchantment, and it is pretty much, it's a fantastic card. Not just in Valkyries, just in general, as enchantments go. You know, instantly, you know, the message of this card is basically you can't put jump blocks in front of this. You can't put any sort of rubbish in front of this. You have to put genuine threats in front of this, and even if you do, +2 attack means anything you put in front of it isn't going to last very long. In a lot of ways, it effectively puts your opponent on a timer, because there's only, you know, you can't stand in front of this thing. You really struggle. You know, a short stag could, but even then, you know, if the monster on the demolition speedway is big enough, you're still getting that overrun damage over the short stag. It's not ideal, but yeah, demolition speed. I mean, it's difficult not to make some sort of wordplay or pun involved in this card about running people over. But if you can get a speedway down, then it can be very difficult for your opponent. Putting stuff in front of it means it's just going to get overrun. They can't race you either. I mean, this card is increasing your damage. It's a problem. This card's really good. Really good. It's good in enchantment decks. It's vital in Valkyrie decks, arguably. I can't think of too many decks where if I was playing blue, I wouldn't want Demolition Speedway in the deck. Draw up near band. I'm not very good with it. The only way to explain this is the card itself is really good. I've seen Ejecti playing it on stream. I've seen Rune playing it on his Twitch. When I see champion players play this, it is amazing. Like, this card is so good. They generate so much mana, and they seem to somehow manipulate you into giving them mana for big turns. Because you only get the one temporary, I mean, it is temporary, that's the problem. You have to use it on that turn. So the more experienced you are, and the better you are with artifacts and Fires of Creation decks, the more useful this card becomes. It can be overwhelming. It can be really good, but you have to understand your gem costs, you know, your restrictions. You have to be able to see those turns coming up, especially in terms of what you're burning this turn. You need to be able to see what your opponent is going to do within the next 2-3 turns. Have a general idea. You know, are they way behind? Do they need to flood the board? Are you threatening lethal? Do they need to throw out chump blockers? Always, you know, it's just basically the more experienced you are at the game, the better you are at the game, the better this card is. But I've tried playing it, and if you're splashing around and you're just trying it out, I'd still have it in the deck, because I think you really need to learn how to use this card. But it's not going to win you games straight away, in the way that once you've played a lot of games with it, you'll be able to understand how it influenced the game so heavily, and it influenced your ability to get ahead of your opponent and just stay on top. And even when your opponent is fighting to get back in the game, there are limited ways in which they can fight to get back into a match with you without, in fact, giving you more temporary mana. So it can just be oppressive. This card is subtly oppressive. Really good. But, you know, all I can say is you need to be good with it. I'd play it because it's amazing. It's an amazing card. It requires you to be good, which I'm not. This card I've already talked about a little bit, and it's pretty self-explanatory in that respect. Philly healing whenever an enemy minion dies means that if this is the biggest minion on the field, your opponent has no way of getting rid of it outside of spells or enchantments, you know, something. But basically, a lot of the time, you put this on a Carnhenge, and a 3/4 on turn 2 just locks down 3 lanes that your opponent just can't get to. Putting a honed edge on it, you know, suddenly your opponent is looking at a 4/4, and you know, this is tough. Turn 2, a 4/4, your opponent is struggling. And one of the strengths of blue is definitely they have a couple of combinations, you know, sort of going through 1 to 3 that are like really go fast, immediately give your opponent problems, you know, really give them questions that they have to answer. And you can get run over by blue super easily. You know, Carnhenge into Einherfane, and then you know, your opponent is just trying to slow down the onslaught. Demolition Speedway means that they can only hope to contain it. They can't stop it. It just keeps going. And the sheer amount of value and stats you get out of it is pretty impressive. It does require a little bit of setup, but the card itself, a 2/3 for 2, is pretty fine. It means against a lot of aggro decks or decks that are running Infuse, they have to infuse in order to take Einhar Feint off the field, which means it's a tempo advantage. They have to use their turn in order to get rid of this one card, and that then gives you the initiative. You're the one that's then placing threats on the board, and they have to start answering you, not the other way around. Yeah, healing. I mean, 5 health to a minion is a little bit too situational. Normally you would just have another bomb in the deck. You wouldn't have this and be thinking, oh well, that's so amazing. I could get my living mountain and then I could crash it into something and then heal it. You'd just be thinking, well, instead of this card, I could just have living mountain and volcanic Rissy or Hyperborean. I mean, I won't say stuff like Magnus or Blackened, because if you're going to have those, you'll have them anyway. It's got nothing to do with this. But you just have another bomb instead of this card. The draw a card is something that I like, because, I like cantrips. But 2 mana for the cantrip, and the cantrip not actually being that great. Clay Effigy laughs at this card. Clay Effigy does a million different things. I love Clay Effigy. This card, you need a minion on the field. It doesn't need to be damaged. You can restore 5 health to a minion that isn't damaged. But then you're just paying 2 mana for the cantrip, and the card slot is just... What even is this? There's a situation where it could be useful, but if you're trying to climb the ladder, and you've got to be prepared for a variety of decks, this isn't a card I'd be looking to. False Molnir. No one uses this. The best decks to use it in would be ones where you've got minions with gigantic backsides, I think. But, the whole idea that you can just throw this on your opponent's Icky Terso and then crash 3 minions into it and they've basically unwittingly killed themselves is pretty amusing. It's not used in a lot of decks. Again, because it's a bit too situational when you need to be prepared for a whole variety of decks and ranks. If you're sort of looking at the ranked ladder and you're thinking, right, well, what do I need to be prepared for? Yellow, green, red, orange, yellow, green, orange, Valkyries. And then you look at False Molnir and you're like, okay, well, against yellow, green, it might be useful. But the problem is, am I really going to have the minions in front of these beasts enough of the time? Am I really going to have minions in front of Iku enough of the time that can attack? Probably not. Yellow-green has the volition. A lot of the time, if it's going to kill you, it's not putting anything close to you. And you can't finish them through Molnir. Or, of course, there's the Abomination OTK at the end. It's sort of a meme card, like your opponent puts down a big fatty and then, you force Molnir it and you've got 3 rubbishy blockers and they all just crash. That's not normally a win condition. You're hoping your opponent does something. And then in this case, what you're hoping your opponent does is inexplicably put down an incredibly strong card in front of 3 of your minions. Not just 3 of your minions, but 3 of your minions that don't really have a lot of value. Is a little bit questionable. I mean, I suppose you could say, if they put down Sapo in front of your minions because you're threatening lethal. But then the argument is sort of, well, if you're in the driver's seat and you're threatening lethal and they're having to use Sapo, not as an assertive move, but as a defensive one to try and stop you from getting lethal, you're already ahead in the game. And then with False Molnir, are you, it's not even a win condition then. It's just a memey way to win, but you're already ahead. And this card isn't helping you. Ice Spike. when I see it, I hate it. I really don't. I mean that in a good way, as in I don't like seeing this card. It's so frustrating to play against. The stun is a little bit overlooked. The 2 damage is pretty awesome as well. It's useful against a lot of different things. It's one of those cards that, you know, when you're putting cards in the deck that you think have potential or you might want to use, and then eventually you get up to, you know, 50, 60 cards and you need to start cutting down. This card is one of those cards that you start cutting first because it's so good, it's such great value, but for one of your valuable card slots, it doesn't really synergize enough with any particular deck types. It's just an overall useful card. It does a lot of things. It just ends up getting cut. It's a good card that ends up getting cut. That's all I can say really. It's a really good card. It just ends up getting cut. The problem with returning enchantment to its owner's hand is they can just play it again. You also draw a card, so it basically replaces itself. For 2 mana, you might create a small tempo play. Some decks don't really run that many enchantments, and even if they run enchantments, the enchantments aren't the way they win the match. You know, if yellow-green has a Bay Many Falls down, and you're using Dwarf Song, what deck are you playing? You're probably not playing Valkyries, because Valkyries is trying to rush them down immediately as possible, and they don't have time to slow down and play Dwarf Song. You're playing a sort of a control deck yourself, so you're trying to out-control yellow-green. Yellow-green doesn't care. The cases where Dwarf Song is useful are the cases in which it's not useful. That's a weird way of saying it, but yellow-green is not going to care if you bounce the Bay Many Falls. The big issues such as Heaven and Hades, you know, red-orange mid-range decks, stuff like that, where you really want to get rid of the enchantment. Well, red-orange players, the top red-orange players, don't just play Heaven and Hades out of nowhere. They'll have, you know, a Perry at the gates in a good position, and then on their turn, when they decide, they'll put down, you know, Stairway to Heaven, and then, you know, underneath Perry and kill Perry. It's not just waiting around. So if you return the enchantment after Perry's already been bounced back to hand with its, you know, mana reduction, the Dwarf Song just is not achieving anything. I can't think of a deck where I'm thinking, right, well, if I'm running a sort of deck that has this card, what sort of deck that I play against is this card going to be so valuable? And there are definitely decks that run valuable enchantments, but the times to use Dwarf Song, there aren't any really great times so often in a game to use it. It's just a small tempo play. For 2 mana, you might bounce back a 5 mana enchantment. You know, you've made a small tempo play. I mean, 2/3 is okay. Lurker is okay. But again, I sort of mentioned breaches up here with Fev Plagiarist. The breach effect isn't that great, and it's a question of why are you playing this card, and considering the sheer amount of effort, when you take into account that it doesn't have agile or rush or any way of actually breaching quickly or efficiently or effectively, is the payoff of your opponent plays with a hand revealed actually worth it? No, not really, and that effect disappears as soon as the broker dies. It's just not good, you know. It's a rubbishy breach effect. 2/3 for 2 with a crack, like, I haven't seen too many decks that run this. Data Core, another fantastic artifact. Draupnir banned Data Core. Can give so much temporary mana. I think if they were taking out the game, Fires of Creation would struggle so much because these cards are amazing. And similar to Draupnir banned, the more experienced the player and the better the player, the more useful Data Core is, because, you know, you get energy when a minion dies. You can look ahead. It's It's not quite to the level of Draupnir Band, but still, you need to be able to look ahead a turn or two and look at the board state and understand when you're likely to get temporary mana and the best times to cash out and get your temporary mana. Fantastic card, definitely in Pfizer creation decks. Even, I mean, this is true. I don't know if I said this for Draupnir Ban or not, but even outside of Pfizer creation decks, this card is still so good. Putting this down on a 2, you could argue, because you've spent, your turn 2 doing nothing is not worth. But the ability to move effectively, cheat something out a turn or 2 turns earlier than it would normally be able to get onto the board is such a big deal that likely what is going to happen is Data Core goes down on turn 2, then the board fills up. Data Core might have taken some damage, but in Pfizer creation decks in particular, of course, there's then going to be another artifact protecting it, plus the board, minions have died. At some point, you flip the switch, use your Data Core, create massive value, a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 trade with a creature that your opponent isn't equipped to deal with yet. And then it builds up and you do it all over again. And you can grind your opponents down doing that. It's so effective. So not just in Pfizer creation decks, but of course, especially in Pfizer creation decks, 10 out of 10. It's a really great card. I really, really like this card. Ravine Guardian, jury's still out on this. Sometimes I think it's amazing. Other times I'm thinking, well, it's a 1/3 when it's attacking. So your opponent's only taking 1 damage at a time, which they don't care about. And in terms of things that it's actually defending against, if your opponent has Infuse, they probably don't care too much about going into a 4/3 because they have the 3 almost always. So you would be using this more against sort of control matchups, or at least slower decks where the 4/3 stat line might actually be intimidating. For 2 mana, this is okay. It's a really inconvenient card that might be able to slow down certain decks. Perhaps aggro, in as much as you might buy the turn if they have to, trapezist and infuse. That's 4 mana, so you've definitely slowed down aggro, and it could be a difference maker in that respect. I wouldn't say it's an amazing card, but it's a very solid card, and I still haven't made a complete decision on exactly how good this card is, because from match to match it seems to vary quite wildly. Definitely another 40-50 matches to try now, I think. Root of the World. As far as enchantments go, this is probably one of the most utilised enchantments, not just in Rainbow's End decks, but often decks that run tokens, such as Orange. Orange, you throw down your Eager Cadet, and then you've got a Passer recruit as well, and it's just this crappy 1/1/1. You'd rather put the Passer recruit onto Root of the World, even though it's ephemeral, and just get rid of it, replace it with an actual card. In Angel Loop it's good, but I haven't seen an awful lot of Angel Loop in a long time. I don't know anyone that's playing Angel Loop right now. It's a bit too slow a lot of the time. People don't play a lot of Angel Loop right now. I don't think it's tier 1. But yeah, if you've got tokens, this is effectively pay 1 mana, replace with one of your actual cards, and it also allows you to cycle. Of course, if you absolutely need to cycle to look for something, then this is pretty fantastic. Also, at least it's not great knowing that the minion is at the bottom of your deck, but at least you know where it is, if you know what I mean. So if you've only got 4 minions left, and then you have to keep cycling, you have a general idea of when you're going to be getting things back. That sounds weird to say. Yeah, very useful, very versatile enchantment. It won't directly allow you to win the game, as much as it just allows you to trade in all of the stuff that isn't giving you value or isn't necessary right now, and replace it with potentially more relevant answers, more useful tools for the situation. Whatever situation you're in right now, Root of the World can help you. Sons of the Pack, Fang Alpha 9, of course, this is pretty much a must-have. A 2-2 for 2 is not great, which is why it's good in Fang Alpha 9, but outside of that, it's not really all that great, because you have to buy into the whole concept. There are quite a few K9s across the colours, but, you know, it's a slightly situational, you know, you need another K9 around it. 2 for 2 isn't. It trades with a trapezist, I guess that's the best you can say. And you know, a pack trooper and it buff sitting next to each other. Yeah, in Fang Alpha 9, very, very good. You're getting that chain going, basically. Outside of that, not so great. Stone Mother, I haven't played this enough. It's annoying playing against it, but as a yellow-green player, I don't care that much. You know, this is slowing me down, but I don't really need to go anywhere. I'm not rushing. When I put IQ Terso down, this is going to be reasonably insignificant, you know, and it might last that long. I'm just in no rush to remove it. This isn't sort of a, oh my god, like I need to remove this card immediately. It's not threatening anything. It's just really, really annoying. It does greatly increase the annoyance factor of cards next to it, of course. If you've got a Vixen standing next to a Stone Mother, oh, that is just, they're going to keep pulling Razors in Shadow over and over and over again out of that graveyard. And at that point, Stone Mother becomes a problem. Even then, I think Yellow-Green has answers to it. I think most decks have answers. And, you know, you can always just seal the Vixen anyway. So that's the most useful it can be, or it's actually protecting something valuable. But it needs to be around for a long time. And that's time that your opponent's ramping up. You've spent 2 mana on something that isn't actually going to help you win the game most of the time. Valkyrie Tough. I'm about to say something controversial, but I don't know. I don't think it's that controversial. Yeah, Valkyrie Tough, arguably the best 2-drop in blue. One of the best 2-drops overall. I mean, 3/3 for 2 are incredible stats. It's a Valkyrie. I was talking about Einhar Thane. Very similar. You know, Carnhenge turn 1, turn 2, Valkyrie Tough is a very common line of play. And is one of the reasons that mono blue tribal Valkyrie decks is actually a thing. Because a turn 2 3/3 is something that is going to trade 2 for 1 so easily. It's such a problem, and in Valkyrie decks your opponent can't afford to leave it alone. It's just way too much. You're not looking at 3 damage when Horn comes down, you're looking at 8 damage just from this. You have to try and put something in front of it, but at 3/3, you know, I mean, if you're on the play, then you know your 3 mana turn comes up behind this. So they put down Valkyrie Tough, and then you've got 3 mana. I mean, it's just a horrible situation though. What are you going to trade? Trade from 1 to 3. What can you trade with Valkyrie Tough that's really going to be worth? A Racer in Shadow that's infused would sort of trade, but you've lost your turn. You've used infused and a Racer in Shadow, so you've sort of traded upwards. That's the best possible trade though. You know, other things like Iron Belly Wyvern could take it out on your 3. But that's a 3 mana into a 2 mana. So the Valkyrie player is very much sort of got ahead, and in an aggro deck, you don't want to be trading. You don't really want to be using your Iron Belly Wyvern to trade into a Valkyrie Tough. You want to be going straight to the face. But you can't be leaving a 3/3, often a 4/4 or a 5/3 if it's on a Demolition Speedway, just hanging around. Oh, it's just, this puts a question to your opponent almost always. This card is so annoying to play against. You're just caught, you know, between a rock and a hard place. You have to block something. You can't leave it unblocked. You've got to try and get something in the way and reduce the amount of damage you take. Even if you've got Misanthropia in hand, Valkyries can win before that if you just let them do whatever and just run over you. It's ridiculous. This card is really, really, really strong. It should be a common, but in terms of actual power, I think it's one of the strongest commons in the game. I think it's one of the strongest 2-drops in the game. It's just so... Oh, I think I've talked about it enough. Black Hatter. I mean, it scares the hell out of your opponent if you play it early. It scares the hell out of me when I see someone else play it early. But a 2/3 for free, 2 mana, get a move action, and it has teleport. That's quite an investment. If your opponent puts a chump blocker in front of this and you've got no other way of getting rid of the chump blocker, that's 5 mana altogether to deal 2 damage and discard a card, which certainly isn't bad. In the early game, is really scary. Against yellow-green, this is a card that there are a lot of different ways of handling it. Bella, Meso Libre. I don't want to say Sapo because we're talking about early game here. But there are definite ways of destroying this card. But even knowing that there are so many tools in yellow-green to deal with Black Hatter, just the fact that it can discard cards is pretty scary. I suppose the way to phrase that is, when it works, it really works. Most of the time it won't work. Honestly, I'm not sure if it should be in most ranked decks, because 7 matches, 8 matches out of 10, it's not really going to do anything for you. But 1 game in 10, 2 games in 10, your opponent's going to discard something that they really need. Just the fact that you're reducing your opponent's options is so significant. It's a real threat. Your opponent has to answer it, or suddenly they've got no hand whatsoever. And Valkyries is already quite dominating. I mean, mono blue, not just in terms of Valkyrie decks, but just in terms of blue. If it's not obvious already, blue just has stuff like Feign, and you're just like, oh my word, like, this is a problem. It can get going really fast. It's got one of the most threatening 1 to 2 drop sets. How do I do that? I just jumped to the bottom. Definitely. So Black Cat can be scary because you're often not in a position to deal with it. But Brainstorm, 3 mana to draw 2 cards is not great. There are so few decks that want this card because other colours have much better card draws. Green has Raid the Tombs, which is 2 mana, draw 2 cards. That's pretty amazing. I don't like Revelation of Shimek, but even Revelation of Shimek, in terms of value in a card slot, for a single card slot, Shimek is expensive in mana, but it only takes 1 card slot and you get 3 cards. This is 1 card slot as well, but you get 2 cards for 3 mana, and it's... I mean, in terms of across your deck, you're going to lose so much tempo from this. I don't like it. It's not that efficient. It's pretty rubbishy, to be honest. Daughters of the Forest, sort of in the way that Black Hatter is. Daughters of the Forest is very much sort of, when it works, it really works. If your opponent's got very few ways of dealing with a 3/1 Alpha Strike, then this is going to be extremely useful. If you can, but it's a bit too expensive is the problem. Against aggro, for example, you look at the aggro list and you're thinking, wow, like a 3/1 Alpha Strike against an aggro list that has Iron Belly Wyvern, Trapezist, Strigoi Pup isn't going to get its life tap off because Alpha Strike does its damage before Strigoi Pup does its damage. There won't be any life tap at all. It's so effective against almost all of the deck, but 3 mana, by that point aggro has already gotten started, and it's the few answers that it does have to a 3/1 Alpha Strike are around 3, 4, 5 mana. Bull is at 3, Abaddon is at 4, Magmatar is at 5. So just the fact that it's on 3 mana makes it inconvenient against aggro. Yellow-green doesn't like it, but it doesn't care. This isn't a card that is dropped and I'm instantly thinking, this is a problem. We need to work out how to deal with this. 3 damage is a bit annoying, but it's not creating the presence that it needs to, and at 3, I mean, Misanthropia will get rid of it at 5 anyway, so it will hit me twice, perhaps. Or I can put a chump block or a collar block in front of it. You know, there are plenty of ways of holding it off. And the times that it doesn't work, it can be a disaster. If your opponent's playing blue, I don't think you can ever feel good about Daughters of the Forest, really, because Thunderclap gets rid of it immediately. Magnus gets rid of it immediately. I mean, don't see it often, but you know, Ice Spike gets rid of it immediately. It's just in an awkward position. 3 mana. I don't see how it can be 2 mana 3/1 Alpha Strike. But the fact is that 3 mana means the answers to it are around at the same time as it. So it's hard to really value the card. It sort of gets hit on the board at the perfect time if your opponents go, oh, that's convenient, and just deal with it. Earthslide. You know, I think reading the card is pretty obvious what the potential of Earthslide is. The ceiling on this card is really, really high. It's effectively a cheaper, better 7-ring ritual. It does require more setup, of course, but instead of getting, you know, 6 or 7 3/1s on the board, for 1 card slot and 3 mana, you can end up with, you know, 3, 4, 5, 3 3s, 4 4s, 2 2s. You've just got a bunch of issues immediately. And if you are a rainbow deck and you have a rubbishy start, but you have Earthslide in hand, it's so easy to get back into the game. There are often a lot of anything that works with 7-ring ritual will probably work with Earthslide as well. The setup is tougher, but oh my word, like, what's not what is not sort of obvious from reading the card is, of course, elementals are created on all of your enchantments, but that doesn't take into account the actual enchantment. So your Earth, you know, you have, say, 4 enchantments on the field. You use Earthslide and, you know, Carnhenge, theoretically it's a 1/1, but actually you get a 2/2 on Carnhenge. On Demolition Speedway, you got a 4/2. You know, suddenly you've got, you can create some real problems really quickly, and it can come out of nowhere. If you've got the enchantments on the board, suddenly all those enchantments are filled. You're getting all the benefits from all your enchantments all at once. It's fantastic value in a single card slot if you've got that sort of deck. You need a rainbow deck. I wouldn't recommend it in any other deck. It's, of course, so reliant on enchantments. But it can just turn the game around. Even on turn 4 or 5, that early in the match, suddenly having Earthslides is like Scourge of Serpents plus in some... I mean, am I overselling it? I've definitely seen some crazy turns with Earthslide, that is for sure. It can be a difference maker. It can be a game winner, honestly. Ironheart, Berserker is sort of threat fodder more than anything, because your opponent can't leave this alone. They absolutely cannot leave a 3/3 that, if you so wish, gets Frenzy. That's too much damage, because all it really takes, it's not obvious from the sheer amount of enchantments and all of the buffs we've seen so far. All it really takes is, you know, a Carnhenge or a Demolition Speedway, and this isn't a 5/3. Blue cards, as a general rule, they never are what they look like. They're always threatening something more. So an Ironheart Berserker, you can't leave it on the board, because what you're looking at is, oh my word, like, all it takes is 1 mana next turn and a Demolition Speedway, and I'm looking at 10 damage, you know, from 1 card. That's not taking into account horns, that's not taking into account the rest of the board. Just the threat from blue cards is so strong, and we're not even, you know, getting close to horn yet. Just the fact that it can go Frenzy. Oh, blue definitely has some really strong 1/3s. Ensnaring Serpent is a fantastic card. It's one of those cards that gets cut. unfortunately, in a lot of decks. Of course in Valkyrie decks, but just in blue decks, there are so many threats that it's so difficult to get all of them in. And a 3/4 for free that immobilizes is great, but for threat value, Berserker is more threatening. You put this down on an empty board or in empty lanes, your opponent's got to do something. That's too much threat. Valkyrie Tough is a 3/3 for 2, so it's only got 1 health less, and it's got the Valkyrie tag, which is arguably so much more valuable. So much more valuable. It just gets pushed out. There's only so much space. And Ensnaring Serpent is one of those cards which is a great card that just doesn't quite make it into the final cut a lot of the time. Fork Lightning, if it was cheaper it'd be amazing, If it was possible to use it on earlier turns, but it's situational in so many ways, and in ranked you just can't afford cards that are too niche. What you need for this card to, sort of be as valuable as it can possibly be is inexplicably 3 minions grouped together, one of which only has 1 health, and the other 2 have 2 health, or they're in winter, of course, in which case 2 health, 3 health, in order, to destroy 3 minions, which would be a crazy value play, an amazing tempo play, also incredible value for a single card slot to be able to do that. But that's rarely going to happen. Your opponent very rarely groups up very conveniently. 1 damage, 2 damage is also really not that great in terms of damage. For 3 mana to do this, you're doing like maybe 2-3 points of damage for 3 mana, and you can't. This isn't even something that you can just throw at your opponent to finish them off. There is no reach to this. It's not that great. Fork Lightning really isn't that great. Fosgrim. What can you say? In the decks where it's good, is really, really good. Even in the decks where it's not used optimally or it's not quite as necessary. So just quickly, the decks where it's super useful are of course aggro decks. Your opponent is trying to get minions to block up the lanes and just to get in front of your minions to stop you from constantly going face. And Fosgrim means you can create value trades, and then open up all your other minions. All of them have a free action. Is incredibly significant. If you've got 3 or 4 minions and this comes down, and they've all got a move action, you're opening someone up to deal another 3, 4, 5, 6 damage to the face, inevitably. It's a massive difference. It's also sometimes used on horn turns as well, if you're just about to finish, and you just need a little bit of space. But I mean, it's a 3/4 for free. So even in decks where it's kind of useful just to get that move action, I've even seen it in blue reds, where because you've got the rush package in red, you go with the infuse power. But just to get that impel effect, that last time just to finish matches, Fosgrim comes down. So the awaken effect is so useful. The regen 1 isn't really that significant a lot of the time, but 3/4 with that sort of awaken effect is really easy to put this in your deck. There's always a place for it, I think. Frecky Psyker is sort of cheesy. When it works, it really works. 1/2 is a terrible stat line. It's even worse because it's on a 3. But my word, just the ability to give adjacent minions rush is so incredibly strong, ridiculously incredibly strong. Arguably this is weaker than Dashing Ringmaster. It's situational, but this is a nightmare. It's a nightmare. If you don't have the answer immediately, you're probably not going to get this off the board, because the best you can do is put something near it so you can potentially take it off the board next turn, but anything they throw down next to it gets rush and will clear whatever minion you've just put in the way. So if you don't, basically if you don't have the answer, you're probably not getting this off the field. And this is effectively a win condition as well. Similar to so many other cards. It's, it's a 1-2 on the field, but what it represents in terms of potential damage is so much higher. There are some unbelievable combos, where stuff comes down, even Storm Dot is chosen, especially on horn turns, but even not just horn turns, but just a Frecky sidecar with 2 scouts on the field. They put a chump blocker, I don't want to say chump blocker. They put down something in front of the sidecar because they have to. They need to get it off the field. Storm Dotter comes down. The Frecky Scouts trade into whatever. You get your value. Storm Dotter is now a 5/5. And it's now got rush. So it just goes straight over whatever they put in front of the sidecar. And your opponent's in a situation where Storm Dotter's on the board and it's 5/5. Sidecar's on the board and it's threatening even more coming down. It's a problem. It's such a problem. If you don't have the answer, it's such a problem. God's Blood Transfusion. Maybe I should just start calling these Einhar cards. Is the card that you put on Einhar and you're thinking, oh my word. So now it heals every time an enemy minion dies. It gets +2/+2. So it's, like a 4/5? And it has regen too. So even if your opponent is somehow playing the game of their life and you're struggling to create great contact, it's still getting health back. So difficult to deal with. Loki's Veil. I haven't played this an awful lot. I've played it in a few of the community decks. It's in the Laser Singing Serpents deck, and in the meta we're in right now, there's quite a lot of Visor creation. There's an awful lot of Rainbow's End. So I can definitely understand why it's in there. It's sort of a tech card. It's a tech for the meta that we're in right now. It's kind of useful, but the fact that it has to be occupied in order to suppress the artifact of the enchantments is just not great, The fact the minion has Lurker is sort of okay, but it's very rarely as useful as perhaps you might think a minion with Lurker is. It really doesn't protect the minion at all. This enchantment is terrible at protecting itself, basically. Maelstrom. I haven't really played. I've played this card in 20-30 matches. Yeah, it can be extremely annoying to play against, but there are worse things. For 3 mana on it, there is too much. Like blue has too much at 3. Like we're not even all the way through 3, and already Black Hatter, if it hits the board, is really scary. Earthslide, Einhar Berserker, Fosgrim, Frecky Sidecar, all things that I'd rate. Maelstrom is sort of irritating. It's annoying to play against. But there are some absolute threats here that need to be handled. It wouldn't be in my deck. If you're really desperate for enchantments, maybe you'd put it in. If you were playing against aggro an awful lot on the ladder, maybe you'd put a copy or 2 in. Because, at the end of your turn, pups go, Abaddons, all that stuff. It's very difficult for aggro to get going when they can't keep their board at all. Even Red Carnival aggro to some degree. This is almost a counter to Red Carnival in some aspects, because the Red Carnival would get the buff but it would be completely useless. They'd lose the minions and they wouldn't be able to trade them in later. But there is just too much. Like, look, we are not even all the way through 3, and there are some absolute monsters here. Maelstrom is, it's just irritating. It's not like this. It's not like Road Queen. One of the most common finishers for Horn is often Horn and then Road Queen comes down. So suddenly all your Valkyries have 2 attacks and they're all +1/+1. They just run over whatever is in front of them and finish the game. Road Queen is one of the strongest sort of turn 6 post Horn cards to play. And it's just useful in general for the ability to trade upwards. If at any point, your opponent puts down, say, trying to think of something really irritating now. Well, it doesn't even have to be really irritating, but just your opponent is desperate and has to put down a Maze of Tiku, and you have, you know, a Frecky Scout in front of it. Then just putting down Road Queen means that the maze lasts one turn, not two, and the turn afterwards, you know, your opponent has even fewer resources. So a small ability to trade upwards, also a finisher for Horn. So much value in Valkyrie decks. It's incredible. Even not taking that into account, a 3/4 for free is strong. This is one of the biggest reasons that Valkyries is just so good right now. Is, you know, the exception maybe of Frecky Scout, which is a 2/1 for 1, which arguably, you know, is still great stats for a 1-drop. Valkyrie Tough 3/3, Road Queen 3/4 for free. Like, the value you get out of them is really high. Storm Daughter is probably the one that you get least out of, just in terms of blank stats. But Storm Daughter very rarely goes down without there being an available Valkyrie to crash into something. Anyway, yeah, so Road Queen. Oh, just incredible value in Valkyrie decks. Absolutely amazing. It's clearly a Valkyrie card though. You wouldn't be playing it outside. Sea Haven. Both sides of this card are amazing. I think it might be just slightly too good for 3 mana. Armor 2 is really oppressive. Like, so few things in this game have Armor 2. Off the top of my head, I can really only think of Perfect Grade. Giving something Armor 2 and Agile is just... this is strong. This enchantment is really, really strong. It's not exactly a win more card either, but it's definitely just... your opponent's trying to block up the lanes, you're going for lethal. You throw down Sea Haven, Agile. Oh, so frustrating. At the same time, if your opponent is trying to finish you and you're just trying to buy time, Sea Haven, Armor 2. So frustrating. It's really difficult to race against Sea Haven a lot of the time, unless you manage to maneuver your minions into the perfect position on the other side of the board. But even then, Sea Haven's still splitting your board up. Really strong enchantment. The only condition really is that the minion on it has to actually be worth something, if you know what I mean. Like, if you put a 1/1 on this, who cares if it's got Agile? You're taking 1 damage a turn. Who cares? Like, this is just... that'd be irrelevant. But when you start combining this with Valkyries and Fast Grims, it's just... oh, it's just horrible. You know, I mean, Ironheart Berserker. Just horrible. Even if they manage to get something, if they haven't immediately taken this out, even if they manage to get something in front of it, then on your turn 4, throwing down Sea Haven and giving it Berserker is 6 damage, and then it adds Armor 2 for their turn. Whatever they put in front of this, and we're trying to deal with the Berserker, suddenly just isn't good enough. So, oh, it's so good. It's so good. You have to have a minion worthwhile. That's not really that stringent a condition. Skilled Hacktivist works really, really well with Frecky Sidecar, and it has a breach effect which is actually worth something. There's a lot of rubbishy breach effects, I'd argue, in early blue. This isn't one of them. Lurker isn't quite as relevant, just because you almost always play the Hacktivist, or the ideal situation is one where Sidecar is down and Hacktivist immediately gets its value and replaces itself. Because otherwise it's a 1/3 for free. It has the Lurker, but I mean, your opponent can see this coming from a mile away. You know, as soon as it's on the board, your opponent can't deal with it. Hacktivist isn't really creating its value there. Your opponent, for whatever reason, has had to concede the value to you. It's not that you know, this card has assertively managed to create value. So, I don't know. A little conditional, but I mean, so far the only card draw we've really seen is Brainstorm and 3 mana to draw 2 cards. It doesn't fit in a lot. It doesn't fit in a lot of these decks. Storm Daughter's Chosen. Yeah, another Valkyrie card. Really, really strong. Often it's held in your hand, as I said before, until you've got a Frecky Scout which can crash into something. You get your value that way. The fact that it has Overrun also adds another dimension to the Valkyrie game, where suddenly you can't just worry about demolition speedways and sort of chump block most of it and then just accept that you're going to take damage. Suddenly you've got demolition speedways, storm dot is chosen. The board itself has so many elements and it's hard to cover all the bases. It's hard to really stop Valkyries from getting big damage turns on you when they can just overrun whatever whatever is in front of them and open up the minions that don't have overrun to in turn then get 3 hits on the face. Braggy Runesinger is just overall a good card. You know, in a void without looking at anything else. It's just a great card. You could put this in almost every deck unless you're really lightly splashing blue. A 3/5 for 4 is pretty good. 3/5 for 4 with warded. You know, it's just like the abilities are so incredibly useful. The ability to put back the cards that you don't need right now and just keep that engine going. So incredibly useful. You know, the frenzy is a little bit slower. You don't normally get to this. As a general rule, if you've given another minion frenzy, the game is almost over. Also, this sounds really weird. I don't know why, but its hand reminds me of a Ejecti. That sounds weird, right? But the left hand sort of looks like a Ejecti left hand. That is nothing to do with individual card evaluations. I just think it's the left hand on the strat looks like a Ejecti's hand. You very rarely use the 4 energy ability. Drawing up to 3 enchantments is very rarely relevant, and of course it's not like you still have to pay to put the enchantments on the board. So it'll give you 3 energy. It'll give you 3 options, I should say. But compared to the ability to finish a match by giving another minion frenzy, if you got something big, Braggy is really horrible. Plus, he can get to it every now and then. 3/5 is a problem. 3/5 warded is a problem. You know, the cycle is a problem. Bridgeway Troll, Valkyrie card, but even outside of Valkyrie, it's... I'll talk specifically about Valkyrie first, but this is sort of yet another element to the Valkyrie game, where they are so overwhelming and they're so overstated that you've got to put stuff in front of them because you just need to buy as much time as you possibly can. A lot of the time you have to put things in front of them, such as Mazes of Vaitiki, that you really rather not. But you know, if you know, you've got to protect yourself from 4 damage, 5 damage, whatever whatever you can. And then they throw down the overrun, and you're still just trying to block. You're just trying to hold on for survival. And then on 4, Bridgeway Troll comes down, and suddenly all those blocks you've made, suddenly they just teleport a Valkyrie of Overrun to something weak, a rubbishy, complete, like 1 health minion, overrun it to get almost maximum. And then because they've then cleared the way by taking that minion out, they suddenly start teleporting all their minions over there, and they all attack your face. And you're sort of at that point where you're like, well, why do you even need Horn? There are if the Valkyrie plan goes really well, there are just so many strategies. There are so many different elements, so many dimensions to that game plan, and Bridgeway Troll is definitely a part of that. Which is so valuable. In Fang Alpha 9, they use marching orders to create free space. In in Valkyrie, they use Bridgeway Troll more often. But both heavy, super fast decks need ways of clearing out minions, and Bridgeway Troll is arguably the mono blue Valkyrie list's way of creating space so they can work. Above and beyond, of course, just Valkyrie's just going over the top of you, destroying everything, and creating 2-for-1, 3-for-1 trades. Junkyard Valhalla, people just don't play near it. If you're in a situation where you put down a Junkyard Valhalla and your opponent is putting things near it and you're trying to contain it, you're already in a good position most of the time, or your opponent's playing so badly that you're probably going to win anyway. It definitely creates value and it's sort of awesome. Also, if your opponent accidentally suppresses a dredge minion that you've taken off of Junkyard Valhalla, it loses the dredge tag, which I've seen a few times. Yeah, so if what you get out of Junkyard needs to be suppressed for whatever reason, or it has overrun, you know, and your opponent just needs to sort of contain damage, whatever the reason, it suppresses the dredge tag as well, which means technically you can have 2 dredges on the field at once. You know, or 4 dredges. But you know what I mean, like the tag gets suppressed. So if your opponent's not careful, it can create more value. It definitely creates a bottleneck, sort of, where your opponent just does not want to go near there. It makes the board a lot narrower. It's a valuable card. I definitely wouldn't say it's sort of one of the key cards in most blue decks. It's a nice enchantment, basically. It's also one of the more valuable enchantments for heavy, greedier rainbow decks, because they go, you know, they sort of go to the top end. Sometimes their starts are not great, and Junkyard's ability to just create minions and a bit of a buffer zone is often invaluable for them. Kara, it's another card that sort of, when it comes down, it doesn't do anything immediately, with the exception of Frecky Sidecar. You know, of course, it falls under Frecky Sidecar, so it's theoretically, but that is a setup. Kara in itself, looking independently at the card, is very much a card that if you put it down and there's no support, your opponent, you know, your opponent can see this coming and has every opportunity to respond. And if they can't respond to it, or you know, they can't stun it, or they can't get a Meso Libre in front of it, whatever the reason, you know, that's not really due to Kara. This could just be any tough card. This could be any big Valkyrie card. Kara almost inevitably creates 2-for-1s when she gets going, even slightly. And purple really does not like dealing with her, because their answer to most things is to ping it off with Races in Shadow. But Kara getting +1 health every time a Racer in Shadow turns up means that's not really a viable strategy. So they're tempted to spirit away Kara, but they only have so many Spirited Aways, and you don't feel great about using Spirited Away on Kara a lot of the time, I think. She's definitely sort of, I mean, sort of a bit like the picture, actually. If you had to sort of pinpoint like the necessary cards in blue, you wouldn't say she's a necessary card, but she adds, she's added muscle. She just sort of like supplements. She's really useful. She often gets good trades. She's a little bit slow though. She's sort of greedy in her own way. Yeah, she's definitely added muscle, but she's not necessary. She's not necessary in the way that you look at some cards and you're thinking, oh my word, like this card is so strong. If you're playing reasonable blue, Valkyrie Tough is something you really want, you know, really, really, really good. And you know, the same with Braggy. You know, in terms of mythics, Braggy is so much higher than Kara. Kara's, I wouldn't say overrated, but there are a lot of ways of handling her, and but she can draw a lot of attention. If she's in your deck and you're thinking, well, she's largely removal bait, then she's amazing in that respect. She's really, really good. Odin Throne, it demands that you build around it, and only specific minions can go on it. And sort of similar to other cards higher up this list, if your opponent doesn't have the answers to Odin Throne, and you know, a minion with 5/2 Alpha Strike, you know, if they don't have the answers to that, and the same as with you know, Daughters of the Forest, this is such a big issue for them. But that's sort of on your opponent, and I've never really seen this card in a match and been like, wow, well, they clearly won because of Odin Throne. You know, I'm more tempted to sort of go, oh, well, they clearly won because their opponent didn't draw Thunderclap or Magnus or Misanthropia, or, you know, a million, you know, like, not a million other cards, but there are so many different ways of handling a minion that is on Odin Throne. And if your opponent doesn't have the answers in their hand, I don't think that's on Odin Throne, really. I don't think Odin Throne, but I suppose you could say in a similar way that sort of Hydra sort of forces your opponent to answer a question. And And if they don't have the correct answer in hand, that's it. Like you will gain so much value from Odin Throne. It's absurd. The extra card is nice as well. It's a good mythic. It's not a vital mythic. And against some decks, this just isn't great. And against other decks, it's really great. But I don't think you can afford to take the hit against decks such as well, red-orange is actually pretty good. Red-orange mid-range or mono-red aggro, stuff like that. I don't think you can afford to take the hit because this is 4 mana and you're not doing anything. And 4, 5, 6 turns 4, 5, 6. A lot of the time, red-orange is looking for lethal. They're hitting you in the face. You could put this down right in the middle, and you know aggro's sort of like, well, so you know what's this doing? Even the minion on top of it gets an extra attack. If they're racing you, so what? Like this isn't a big deal. Only way it's a big deal then is if you've got some sort of life tap on it. But the minions that have life tap that you could put on Odin Throne require an even higher mana investment. So it would have to be later in the game, or you know Odin Throne on 4, and then you know a life some sort of life tap minion. You know 5, 6, or 7. You know, like Duskwing Angel could turn up on it. It sounds sort of weird, but I mean, of course, then you'd have a 5/2 Alpha Strike Agile, and that would be pretty lethal. But while you're doing that in the middle with your, you know, life tap Duskwing Angel, that's 2 turns and nothing's actually happened yet. You've just put a minion in the middle, and aggro's hitting you in the face that entire time. You know, it's too inconsistent for climbing in rank. You need consistent value, cards that you can rely on all the time. Odin Throne isn't quite that. Rider of Edda, yeah, I mean 4/5 for 4 with Overrun is good. It's definitely a value train, and if you can get it down and doing the slights things, weirdly, it makes mono blue Valkyrie less powerful. Like Rider of Edo Valkyrie decks aren't tier 1. A lot like I think it's a slower version, and the problem that you face against Valkyrie decks is the speed. It's a lot of stats really quickly leading up to a horn, and you just are falling backwards the entire time. Like you just cannot get good trades against that deck because the stats are too big. And Rider of Edda is sort of like this value engine, and it'll keep creating value for you. But on the 4, I'm not really great on it. It's sort of half. I was going to say, well, let's just say half backsided, shall we? But you know, it's basically, you know, you've looked at the Valkyrie deck and it's super aggro, and you've gone, oh well, I'll put in my little get out of jail free card. But by doing that, the deck is less aggro. If you build around Rider of Edda, you lose one of the key strengths of Valkyries. I feel. It's still good in a lot of blue decks that aren't really Valkyrie decks, so much as they just have Valkyrie components, because the Valkyrie components are of course so great. You know, I mean, just Valkyrie Tufts and Storm Daughters Chosen often end up in a lot of decks. Freki Sidecar too ends up in a lot of decks that aren't Valkyrie decks, and Ryder can, you know, sort of create, you know, 2, 3 Einhar Thanes perhaps. It can definitely do things. It's not bad, you know. A 4/5 with Overrun for 4 is good already. The ability is nice and will probably generate you a bit of value. But I just think it's sort of a slower control-based card, and blue isn't that a lot of the time. Just looking at blue, not in terms of color combinations, but just looking at blue, I don't really think that blue's looking for that sort of card. Rune of Denial. Oh, I think this is necessary. I think it's not great because you can see it in the same way that you look at Rider of Edda, where you're thinking, well, this is sort of get out of jail, or you know, I'm going to go super aggro, but this is just in case my opponent puts something in. But so often it's the finisher as well. You can also get incredible value. You know, 4 mana is not great. You have to be really, really stuck. The fact you can suppress a minion, in terms of racing with blue decks, a lot of the time, being able to suppress a life tap minion significantly increases your chance of winning. As soon as your opponent has some way of getting life removal, that race starts going against you. It's not in your favour anymore. And of course, destroying an enchantment is great. So for a single card slot, it does a lot. Rune of Denial does a lot. Tailroot Worm. I sort of feel this is self-explanatory. If you're playing enchantments, a 6/6 plus whatever the enchantment is. So if it's on a Carnhenge, it's a 7/7 is a massive deal. You know, putting it on a Demolition Speedway. This is often a finisher. It's massive stats, really cheap, which shouldn't be that surprising. There's been a common theme so far. You know, clearly in blue, there's a lot of common themes. One of these themes is big stats relative to cost. Blue has the capability of just putting out big things that other colours can struggle with relative to the turn that they're at, relative to the mana value they're at. Haha, Long Winter. I've played it twice. The jury's still out. It's really frustrating to play against, but I think it's frustrating because it's weird and you have to get used to it. I honestly think someone could climb up ranked with a Long Winter deck because no one knows how to play against it. So if someone actually sort of really worked out the best ways of creating a deck which included Long Winter, it would just be so effective. You know, Rush is completely negated, Volition completely negated. Any ability to hit the board and immediately start doing things, massive problem. Utility action, no. You know, Bella hits the floor, can't stun anything. Long Winter is a super powerful card that no one knows how to play. And that's not surprising because there are other more direct ways of winning matches. This isn't in itself an obvious win con. I think it's a really awkward win con. If someone put the time in though, eventually there might be a Long Winter tournament deck that takes everything because there is just the ways of handling this are awkward. You basically have to get rid of this enchantment if your opponent's prepared a deck which is really sort of built around the Long Winter and considered it. It's also a very blue card because one of the main advantages of bringing everything into play stunned are the fact that minions that have utility actions, they can hit the floor and immediately, you know, like Steam Bun can hit the field and then immediately sacrifice itself. Bella can immediately stun. They can't do that with Long Winter on the floor. But blue doesn't care about that quite as much. That sounds weird because of course after Valkyries where they want to hit the floor and immediately rush. I'm just talking about the colour blue in general. One of the primary factors we keep saying is just big stats for low cost. It's not so much about the abilities, it's about how annoying it is trying to deal with such big minions. And you can only imagine, of course, you know, stuff like Kara, of course. You know, as minions come down, she's going to get stronger. Nothing can immediately take her out. This definitely has potential. I think eventually someone might prepare a deck and it's going to go so counter meta that it will just sweep everything. I hope. Talking of meta though, Thunderclap, super obvious, amazing. The decks that it works against, it just changes everything. Like I've already talked about, you know, Odin Throne and Daughters of the Forest, where your opponent doesn't have the answers. They're great and they can be so inconvenient. But your opponent has the answers, you just lose so much. They're just not that good at all. They're really, really bad. And you know, it is the ability to sort of just clear any half finished monsters, anything that's left at 1 health, stuff like that, off the field straight away. It deals 2 damage to your opponent as well. It's very rarely the finisher. But stuff like blue going Horn and then Thunderclap, not even just to finish the board, but just to weaken the opponent board, so they can then have a massive swing turn and go straight over, is pretty big. I'm not even talking about finishers, just, you know, Horn, Thunderclap. That's a little bit broken. Give all your minions 2 attacks well, give all your minions an additional attack. They have 2 attacks. Deal 2 damage to your opponent and all enemy minions. And that arguably only costs you 4 mana, because of course Horn gives you all your gems and your mana back. So it costs you 4 mana, 4 gems to do it. That is a crazy thing. 4/5 for 4 is okay. The regen 1 is so irrelevant, and there are other things that are far more useful. Not just at the 4 slot, but just in general. You know, I mean, if I was looking for stats, like I said, this regen 1 isn't a big deal. 4/5, but Tailroot Worm is a 6/6 if it's not an enchantment. You've got 4/5s right here. You know, like so irrelevant. 5/4. You've got stuff that is around the same stat line, and it's actually useful and it's actually good. And there are only so many spaces on your 4. You know, compared to a Bridgeway Troll, this is just apparently Ragnarok Tainted. I assume they're talking about this one, but let's be honest. I mean, Ragnarok clearly, maybe you should have been tainted too, because you're rubbish, complete rubbish, disgraceful. Gotta do more push-ups or learn how to travel between dimensions in space and time. Valkyrie Enforcer, rare for a blue card. You know, a 2/2 for 4 isn't really blue at all. It has the Valkyrie tag, and it is amazing, of course. I can imagine some sort of ephemeral bounce sort of deck where it just becomes so incredibly annoying. You can't keep anything stuck to the board because it just keeps getting returned to your hand, or it just keeps getting banished and disappearing because it's ephemeral. But overall, you know, at the 4 spot, I just said this, so much competition. Valkyrie Enforcer doesn't make it in a lot of decks. Winterwolf, some canine decks, but turn 4 you're really trying to reinforce your pack in Fang Alpha 9. So Winterwolf doesn't tend to be in those decks a lot. And, you know, Piercing's sort of dead. So you're paying for a keyword that you're not even really using. 5/4 at 4 mana isn't, you know, 4 health. There are definitely ways of getting around that. It's okay, but it doesn't help the pack. It doesn't buff anything. The canine decks that it's in the same way that you could argue, you know, Rider of Edda, Valkyrie versions that have Rider of Edda in, and sort of lean more towards creating value that way. Canine decks have Winterwolf in. It's a slower card that isn't really the way that the deck type often wins. Black and Jotun, fantastic card, 6/6 overrun for 5 is amazing, but it gets cut in a lot of decks. There's just too much competition. We've already seen so much competition. 6/6 isn't even that crazy. I mean, for 5, but of course, Tailroot Worm is representing something so much. You know, it's difficult. The advantage, of course, is that it's just unconditional 6/6 for 5 with overrun. So it's a big threat at 5. This is pretty good. It's sort of the equivalent of Volkov Heavy in green. It's better though. Yeah, I mean, of course, a Jotun fights with Volkov Heavy, and the Jotun is still alive afterwards. It's better than Volkov Heavy, arguably, but Volkov Heavy represents sort of a more balanced card. Jotun is very much offensive, and it's about finishing and just get, you know, I mean, it sort of feels like a more aggro card. And Volkov Heavy has the armor 1 and the overrun, and it pays for that in slightly lower stats. But the armor 1 at least also makes it a balanced card, and it fits in a few more things. It's also a K9, so. Whereas Black and Jotun is in such a difficult spot at the 5. As we work through, you know, just blue has some serious competition in some of these places, and Jotun often gets cut. It's a great card that gets cut. Giant Stairway. This is a difference maker, basically. I mean, your opponent has to deal with this straight away. In blue-red, Giant Stairway can be a win condition in its own, because throwing rush minions on this, +3/+3 is so gigantic. Just a turn or two of having a Giant Stairway on the field, and you're dictating where your opponent can play, what they can play, and the threat is so incredible. Also, not taken into account, of course, common finisher is Horn and then Giant Stairway underneath something. Either to trade for a 2-for-1 or to just remain surviving after something's dead. So it has 2 attacks. Giant Stairway means it actually survives after destroying something big, and then swings in, which of course the swing is also +3 damage. It's a massive difference maker. It's effectively +6 attack on an All-Father's Horn, which is a massive deal. Jotun Shatterfist, sort of like a blackened Jotun. It's just not used, except it requires even more dedication than Jotun. And that fragile 1 is so frustrating, because if it didn't have the fragile 1, of course, you could imagine some crazy Plague Maidens thing going on, where it could end up, you know, with like 11, 13 attack easily. And then some sort of, you know, like, if it was already on the field, Horn, Plague Maidens will just finish games. It's not like Blue needs any help finishing games. Horn is ridiculous. But, you know, the fact that it starts at 3 attack, your opponent can just completely ignore this. It's pretty irrelevant. You need to find ways of pinging it yourself, because your opponent isn't going to help you unless on the turn that they're attacking it, they're destroying it. 9 times out of 10. Magnus, incredible value. It's Thunderclap, but you also get a 4/4, and you only have to pay an extra 1 mana for that. Like, you pay an extra 1 mana and you get a 4/4 body on the field. That's really, really good. It's good in the situations that Thunderclap is good, plus situations where you just need another body on the board. Can't hurt to have it. It's just amazing, isn't it? It's just extra value. It's sort of like, it's already great. Thunderclap is already a good card, and then, you know, why not for 1 mana? Let's just put an extra 4. You know, like, wow, this is great value. Definitely one of the best mythics in the game. Times when you need to board clear, it's useful. Times when you need the body, it's useful. Times when you just need an extra minion, it's useful. There are very few cases where you're thinking, okay, well, this is just a dead card. There's normally something it can do, even if it's just a minion is injured and it finishes it off. Or it clears a gap for something else to attack through. Magnus is a pretty versatile card, and it's very powerful too. Tyr. This is sort of like a really big, amazing Ironheart Berserker in some ways. In so much as, you know, it already is souped up. It has the frenzy and it's threatening, but not on this turn. That's the only problem. Not on this turn unless you've got Frecky Sidecar. One of the many advantages to Frecky Sidecar. You know, the demise can be amazing, but your opponent has to let you be able to kill it on the turn that it attacks. You know, if your opponent kills it on their turn, this demise effect is useless. Frecky Sidecar means this represents 8 damage for 5 mana, which is certainly not bad. Of course, that could be so much higher with All-Father's Horn or, you know, other crazy things. But honestly, if you've got a Frecky Sidecar and you can put down a Tyr, that's pretty great. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what are you supposed to say? If your opponent lets you, then the demise effect is pretty good. It represents damage, basically. It's elimination bait. It's really threatening, but it's not fast. It doesn't have rush. It doesn't have overrun. Your opponent can see this coming. This is a slower card. Your opponent can see this coming. All-Father's Horn. This card is just... We've already talked about it so much as we go through the list, and there's a reason for it, and it's just ridiculous. It's often how Valkyries finish, it's how Alpha 9 finishes. The fact that it gives you all your mana back, the fact that it gives you your mana and your gems back, you know, just giving everything 2 attacks is crazy. There are so many combos with this. It's possible to just KO your opponent from 30 HP, even 40 HP in some combos, you know. There are some genuinely disgusting combos. Not just that, but having both horns in hand means that all your creatures then get 3 attacks on the board. You know, already in the community, there's very much the opinion that if you lost to double horn, that's not really a loss. Like what? Yeah, there's nothing you can't do anything about that. It doesn't matter how well you play. Almost, if they double horn, that's it. It's done. It's already too strong. This needs to get nerfed. This is a disgusting card. I hate having to play around it. I hate playing with it. It's just you've always got to think, what if they have Allfather's Horn? But even if they do have Allfather's Horn, what it gives you is just absurd. Some people in Discord, like Zalava, are saying, sort of, well, you can still only win through Horn if you have board control. No, not really. Like Allfather's Horn Magnus, you could have a fairly reasonable board. Allfather's Horn Magnus, oh, that's gone. Allfather's Horn Giant Stairway, the board could have been pretty reasonable. And then, like Horn plus Giant Stairway. I mean, that's not reasonable. That's ridiculous. They're just, this card is honestly disgusting. I hate it. It's too good. It's so annoying. There are some cards in this game that you just don't like, and I think this is bad for the game. I really hate this card. Should not, needs to get patched for sure. Cataclysm. I don't see it very often. It's sort of understandable. I suppose you could argue it's a finisher. Blue doesn't tend to finish through Cataclysm though. 5 damage reach is great, and there's so much overrun through this that maybe it is the difference maker. But it's very rarely run in decks. If you're looking for a sort of a finisher higher up, then you probably just go to 7 because you get the 4 with Volcanic. But if it's not the finisher, it also gives you the 8. So Cataclysm can leave you in a precarious situation, and it really only does the one thing. Volcanic is so flexible. If you need the 8/8 body, it's got the 8/8 body. It also deals 4 damage if you need just a little bit of reach. And the Blast 4 as well. But your opponent in a situation, well, I mean, I want to get to it, of course, when I get to it. But as a general rule, blue decks don't go to Cataclysm. If they want to go for reach, they'll go higher or lower, but not this. Ultio, it's 6. You've got Horn at 6. You've got all this as well, but come on. Hyperborean. Yeah, the piercing's pretty irrelevant. Regen is normally pretty irrelevant too. A 6/8 for 6 with overrun is good. There are quite a few decks, especially Necro decks, that quite like Hyperborean. It's okay. It's one of those things that your opponent can see coming, but it's just so big. 6/8. The ways of removing Hyperborean are the finite ways that your opponent only has so many of. So stuff like Seals of Exile or Spirited Away. Hyperborean is just too big to get rid of any other way unless you're playing against orange and for some reason you've put your Hyperborean next to some sort of weenie. Well, at that point, Dark Passengers come in. So, that was going to happen. If you're playing against orange and you decided that putting your Hyperborean next to a 1/1, you're asking to get Dark Passengered there. And, they can have quite a few Dark Passengers, so that's not even a major loss to them. It's just the loss of a small card to destroy a Hyperborean, which is ridiculous. You probably shouldn't do that. Yeah. This is good, though. Triassic Kraken. I haven't played this yet. The jury's out. All enemy minions are immobile. Sounds amazing, though. And definitely, I know there are a few players in the community that are massive fans of Kraken. Just the ability to hold everything still and have complete control over movement in that respect. Set up the board exactly the way you like it and not allow your opponent to do even just the basic things like move over and make a good value trade. They have to trade with the things that are in front of them all the time. Fantastic. Don't know about this mollusk tribal though. That's a weird tribal tag. I haven't seen too many other mollusk cards in the deck. Draugr, yeah, it's just like Einhard, but more so. It's pretty great, but 7 is already getting towards the top end. And this is sort of one of the weaknesses of blue, I think, arguably, is its start, we can see, it's so amazing, and Valkyrie Tough, 3/3 for 2, is amazing. But compared to what we've just seen in yellow and green, you know, it's 6/6 for 7. You know, it has the overrun. It's great that it fully heals. You know, so like it's a great card. But compared to Short Stag, compared to Iku, I mean, Iku is a 10/10 for 7. Like that's just what like as we get higher up the list, it's clearer that blue has very strong early and very strong tribals. But looking at the, I mean, Hyperborean is 6/8. It's, you know, it's quite solid. Triassic 6/6, Draugr 6/6. We're definitely seeing that the top end of blue is not that great. There are some cards in blue that are not that great, and the higher up the list we get, the more cards are sort of rubbish. Yeah, but this is just not. Your opponent can see it. Maybe it's worth removing. It's okay. But, you know, it's not getting in one of my card slots. Ingrid, not even Valkyrie decks seem to use Ingrid. If you're playing a Valkyrie deck and you get to 7, for whatever reason, then she would represent incredible value. And Valkyrie decks do tend to run out of cards really, really quickly. But the problem is they run out of cards so quickly that you're not likely to get to 7. 7 is way too high. If you get into 7, then the game plan went really, really, really wrong. So Valkyrie decks don't tend to have Ingrid in there. Volcanic. I already accidentally started talking about this card. Probably the best late game card blue has, just in terms of not taking into account Horn, which is at 6. I don't know. You could consider Horn. I mean, Horn's not really a late game card, is it? It's just a BS card, just a rubbishy mid-rangey sort of. Can't even call it mid-range. It finishes matches. If it finishes the match, surely that's the end of the match, so it's end game. But that's ridiculous. Anyway, but yeah, in terms of actual, you know, big fatties, late game fatties, Volcanic is super flexible, you know. The Blast 4 means your opponent doesn't want to group anything up near the Rissy. But at the same time, 8/8 means they've got to put something in front of it. The Awaken gives you just a little bit of extra reach. It's just so versatile. There are a lot of situations where you could use Rissy for a lot of different reasons. Definitely, you know, the top end of blue. Rissy is probably like the only thing that I really get excited about, and I'm thinking, oh, now that is a card that I really want in my deck. That is a card that I'd want to try out in some sort of yellow, green, blue, just to see how it works. I don't think it's on the level of Short Stag or Ikuterso or Sapo, obviously. But I think it's interesting and it has a place. I've definitely got to play with it more. What I've seen of it, especially in tournaments, it's difficult to play around this card. It's so difficult to play around this card. Living Mountain. You know, 8 mana is so incredibly expensive. I don't think, you know, like 12/12 overrun is great. But if if you're paying 8 mana of something, that's the least you should expect. 12/12 for overrun, that's not, you know. But if I'm paying 8 mana, I basically want a game winner. This isn't even a game winner. And we were just talking about Short Stag. Well, Short Stag can play against the Living Mountain. And the Short Stag is alive. And the Living Mountain really is not. And they've dealt the same amount of face damage. To their opponents. It's not great, you know, maybe it gets played in Necro decks, but 8 mana, 4 gems is so incredibly expensive. It has to be a game winner. Like, that has to be just a card that takes control, takes over the whole thing. And Living Mountain is really just a really fatty. It's just a really, you know, it's not dictating much, you know. It's threatening to finish, but you've already got ways of finishing. You know, even getting to 8, if you've got Horn, like, I don't see too many blue decks that have Mountain in. Blue has finishers, you don't need Mountain. Bulwark. When I see Bulwark come out and I'm playing yellow-green, I don't care too much. It's not a massive deal. That's 2 mana you've spent to make something more survivable. But I tend to blight things, or I just tend to destroy them straight up. I don't tend to, you know, try and run things down. I also think it's kind of like, you know, I mean, I've already talked about cantrips a little bit. 2 mana, draw a card. It replaces itself. It's really great in that respect. You get the health and the armor one. If you've got something valuable, then maybe Bulwark is has value. But you've just made one minion more of a target for stuns. And playing yellow green, I can stun all day. Aggro also doesn't care about this card too much. It seems like aggro should care about this card in so much as, you know, how are they going to get it off the field? I mean, the counterplay to this card is just to play other lanes. Just don't play, you know, in the 3 lanes opposite the minion that's got this on. It's not making you more capable of racing. It's not great in that respect. Aggro is pretty happy for you to spend 2 mana to try and make something more survivable, as long as you're giving them the lanes to keep hitting you in the face. If they can keep chasing you down, Bulwark isn't actually a difference maker. Ozdottir, in all the time that I've been playing, I've only really seen this card work once, in as much as, you know, they sort of got the whole thing going and they had something beefy next to it. It was healing. Because it was next to the Ozdottir though, I couldn't get to the Ozdottir. But, you know, top decks have answers to this, and they don't really care all that much. And a lot of elimination, such as Seal of Exile, will just remove something. So fully healing adjacent minions, you'd need to make major value plays. You'd be needing to play against a deck that is mostly crashing minions in. Not only that, but they're crashing in a lot of minions is a war of attrition. I guess sort of like Singing Serpents. You'd need something that just wears minions down over time, is incapable of getting rid of them on the turn they're played or within a turn or two. That's not really realistic of this game. That's not really realistic of tier 1 decks. So this card doesn't have a place in most decks. Like I said, the entire time I've been playing this game, the entire time I've been playing Mythgard, I've only really seen this get going once. And the rest of the time, it's just not good. Headless one, works well with Zmei Hydra, rather laughably, because you do the damage and then Zmei Hydra, because it counts as having taken 1 damage, then heals and gets +2/+2. But it's just too slow, you know. If you could control this in any way, one of the reasons that Plague Maidens is so good is it's controllable. If you want to do 3 damage to everything on the field, 3 damage to both players, then you just use 3 mana. But this, dealing 1 damage to all minions and players, you know, that happening once a turn isn't a massive deal. Especially at 4 mana, like, oh, it's just not that great. It's really not that great. It's extremely annoying because there are a couple of combinations where it's quite neat, but overall there aren't too many decks where I'd put this in. Because there are things at 4, especially in blue, but other colours as well, where your 4 slot is so valuable, especially valuable. Like all of your card slots are valuable, but you look at the available options, and Headless one, way too slow. You have no real control. A 4/4 for 4, you know, with armor 1, not great. Fire Eater, I mean, the fact you have to pay every time you use the ability is extremely annoying. It's 0/3 for 2, and it costs in 2 gems. I've seen a couple of janky decks that have Fire Eater, but not any that have a great win rate on ranked. Sometimes they'll beat you and you'll think, oh, you know, like that deck might actually work, or that looked pretty good. Then you realise when everything's going right, it looks pretty good. But a lot of the time when they play, things just aren't going that well. And just playing a basic deck that's going to give you constant, reliable, consistent value from your cards, it just sort of beats this sort of jank. Wow, I mean, yeah. I think this is pretty great. Controversially great though. I mean, it's pretty useless against aggro. If anything, you might be doing them a favour if you're not careful, because you bounce the trapezist. You know, the trapezist takes 1 damage and survives, then gets bounced. But it has rush, so you're just allowing aggro to reposition in that respect. But a 1/5 for 3 This is one of those cards where your opponent can't go near it, and if you've got a Frecky sidecar down, Brass Bouncer means it just does not matter what's put next. You know, whatever your opponent is trying to put in front, Brass Bouncer is, you know, just saying I have no interest in your silliness. Even like occasionally, once I saw twins get put down. Brass Bounce came down, bounced the Ephemeral Twin, so they instantly lost half their value. It's a neat card. A lot of the time, it sort of gets lost eventually. You know, when you have to cut down your deck to 40 cards. But it's extremely neat. I think when the expansion comes and there's more to work around, maybe it'll gain more value. Right now, it's really pretty great. Manny, Queen of Tarts. Okay, we've been talking about a lot of Valkyrie. We've been talking about a lot of sort of mono blue deck, stuff like that, for quite a while now. But Manny is in a whole different direction. Rune has a Manny Fires of Creation Stretcher deck, which is wow, is pretty strong. Is really, really great as well to see. Manny itself, oh my word, like this is the ultimate threat. Like, we've talked about Berserker, we've talked about other cards in blue, and it's the damage they represent. You know, realistically, Manny's a 2/6 for 5, but this has to be taken off straight away. If your opponent cannot get rid of Manny immediately, then the only alternatives are if your opponent inexplicably can cover the entire board. It's just not realistic. Like this is a threat. This is a massive. This is so great as well. I absolutely love this card. It's at 5, which is unfortunately like a little bit high. 2 mana, 1 blue gem to get standard action. Like I said, it's sort of greedy. It's sort of, but if you can get it down and your opponent can't get it off the board, this is something else. This is scary. Like when your opponent puts this down, you know next next turn you're getting the business. You need to deal with it immediately, or you're just dead. There are always going to be sort of outs to get lethal. Or well, you can't say always, but if your opponent has built a deck around Manny, and you know stuff like Fires of Creation, Stretcher deck that Rune has, where there are multiple ways of finishing. Manny is just fantastic, really good card in those decks. I should say, just in general in those decks. If you build around her, she's just so threatening, really scary. Even in decks that aren't really built around her, but just sort of general aggro or blue-red decks, she's scary anyway. Sort of like an 8 out of 10, but in decks built around her, she's closer to a 9. Yeah, but when your opponent puts this down, you sort of wet yourself. It's a scary card. Just the sheer amount of damage that can be represented. I want to move to the next card, but this is just. I have seen some things, you know, like people come back and you know they've got PTSD and stuff. I've just seen some horrific things happen with Manny, which are just recursionist. Sort of obviously this is more into spell flux decks, such as I was talking about when we went through green. Really strong. Unfortunately, it gives value to your opponent when they play a spell, and very few decks don't have a lot of spells in them. I already talked about this in green. In fact, I've probably talked about, as I go through these colours, I'm going to have talked about them in previous videos. So I'll skip Canine Cavalry as well, because I already talked about it. Stab Crab, Burnmelt loves this card. Theoretically, a 5/1 is amazing. Absolutely incredible. If you take into account that orange has a few ways of giving minions standard actions, such as Vigor. You know, if your opponent puts down a big fatty and you put a Stab Crab in front of it, it's quite funny, but for 2 mana you've actually demanded either you use removal on this, often removal that is of higher value than the 2 mana that the Stab Crab is, or that big minion that you put down. Like, we're not talking big as in late game short stag style big, but just 2 mana, you know, sort of 3, 4, 5 mana. 5 mana monsters. Stab Crab can take almost all monsters. Like, It 5 damage. It's threatening 5 damage to a minion. There aren't too many minions that can survive this. There are very few minions that are super valuable that can survive this. Stuff like, you know, Serpent, or, you know, some of the blank text cards that, you know, might be 5 mana, 5/7 or whatever, could survive a Stab Crab. Those aren't the cards you're worried about. Stab Crab can get rid of a lot of cards, and if your opponent doesn't have the elimination, it's pretty funny. But your opponent is going to have the answer more often than not, and it has 1 health. So the number of different ways of answering this card are so high. It's still pretty funny. It still amuses me. Burnmail seems absolutely insistent on using this card. And so help me, one of these days, you know, there's going to be a big match where he's going to try and get into Champion and record it. And Stab Crab is going to be his win con somehow, inexplicably. Herald of War. Oh, it's too situational, honestly. 7 mana, 4 gems is asking an awful lot, but not just that. You know, 5/5 warded for 7 isn't all that amazing, and you really need your opponent to have enchantments on the field. It's okay. I'm going to say okay. I don't like. It's hard to say this card is good, because when you think about the situations where you need enchantments destroyed, or where it's of benefit, take for example red orange mid range Heaven and Hades. It feels great, you know, like 7 mana, 4 gems. When you put this down, you destroy, you know, to Heaven and back, or maybe you get both of them even, and you've got incredible value, and you've got a 7/7 for 7 with warded. But by turn 7, red orange mid range is already giving you the business with Heaven and back and Stairway to Hades. You've already had to deal with it for, you know, 5, 6, not 5. You've already had to deal with it for turns 5, 6, you know. They've probably got that Perry back in their hand, or whatever value they got out of to Heaven and back. They've probably got that back in their hand. You know, against enchantment decks, you could theoretically think, oh, this is amazing. Against Singing Serpents, it's a big deal, but Singing Serpents is not a tier 1 deck. Are you really building towards, you know, sort of countering Singing Serpents? Singing Serpents is a great deck. It's just not, you know, sort of like right at the top, like a top pinnacle. I don't know if you go into ranked and you can justify bringing Herald of War. Some decks it's almost useless against. Some decks it's great destroying their enchantments, but it destroys their enchantments after they've already gained value from the enchantments. And, you know, other times it's great, but it's not great enough the time. You know, this isn't consistent value, basically. Lore. People have tried building decks around it. I haven't seen a single great Lore deck. Banishing cards from your opponent's deck, you know, is great for a deck out strategy, but so rarely do people deck out in this game or die due to deck out in this game. I play yellow-green variants, which are the most prone to decking out, and I've never, like, how many times have I died due to deck out? Maybe 2, 3 times, and that's, you know, 200 hours of playing Mythgard at this point. So it's a bit, maybe later when they start creating mill decks and, you know, expansion comes, Lort will be really good. At least for right now. It's another card that, you know, doesn't have agile, doesn't have any way of actually helping you to enable its breach. So, and the breach effect itself isn't great. Waystone Garden. I haven't played this enough. I've played against it, I mean, maybe 4 or 5 times, and it wasn't great. I didn't think it was really amazing. I don't think it really made all that much damage. I didn't think it made all that much difference, so I'm a little bit tired. We've been going for 2 hours now. I don't want to sort of like definitively say how good the card is, or really get into detail about it, without playing it myself, probably quite a bit. But from what I've seen, it hasn't been great so far. Right, that is blue. I said it at the start, I'm going to say it once again. We're now getting into the colours that I have the least experience with. So of the 240 hours I've played, I've definitely played blue, and as a Mithril player, you know, I've got some right to evaluate how good or bad the cards are. But I would definitely take it with a pinch of salt. I'd definitely try out cards that you're interested in yourself. Maybe use this as a springboard, and then go from there.